Good, fantastic. Okay. B'siyata d'shmaya, we jump back into Tzidkas HaTzaddik. This is the 8th shiur in the series, and we continue with Ois Chaf Ches, Koyach 28. And the Tzaddik is still continuing to discuss the various Gemaras in the beginning of Berachos, many of the Agadic Gemaras, some of which are Agadic in nature, have halachic implications. This is one of them. This continues on off of what we were learning about last time with regard to the Shalosh Mishmaris Havi Alayla, that the night is split into 3 watches. We spoke about how that applies more broadly in Jewish history. You remember, we spoke at the very end of Isha Mesaperes and Balo, what that means, that the body is talking to us, right? And, sort of body-oriented healing, somatic healing. And so the Gemara says, Lamai nafka mina. Bottom line is, why do you need to know, according to the Manda Amar, who says that the 3rd Mishmar is the end of the last Mishmar, so that would mark dawn, daybreak. Why is that important, right? Why do we need a siman to know when daybreak is? What's the obvious question? Go out and see it, right? And if you see the day breaking, then it's dawn. So why do you need a siman to tell you when that is, right? Memela, in the middle of the night, you have to know, right? Because it's not clear, it's dark, and you don't necessarily know. But in the daytime, l'cha'era, you can just go out and see. So that's what the Gemara asks, and the answer the Gemara gives is we need that sign because man de gani b'bayis afel. What about a person who is sleeping in a very, very dark house? A house that has no windows. A house that is not open to the outside. They're not able to tell from the actual circumstance itself. They need a siman. And then when they hear a baby crying and a husband, talking to and a wife and a husband conversing, then they'll know, it must be that the sun has risen, right? It must be sunrise. That's what it says, man, they're going to be bayis afal. I agree, you can just turn the fan down, okay. So Pirish Kamasha Kalsa Beper Chelek, he says he wants to understand this concept based on what the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Sadi Beis, Amid Aleph, and Perik Chelek, where the Gemara says 3 enigmatic words, heavy, kavel, v'kayam. A person should be kavel. Kavel means bent over, kavel means given over, humble. V'kayam, and kayam of course means secure, confident, well established. And the Maharsha explains, heavy kavel, v'kayam means that sometimes the only way to really get by, the only way to really be kayam, secure and strong and settled, is when a person humbles oneself. Kiditnan, and that's what the Tzidkas HaTzaddik, what Reb Tzadok wants to see as the mashal and the metaphor of a dark house. Where else do we find this concept of a dark house? In the Gemara, which refers to a kohen coming to check out the negat saras. What does the pasuk say about a negat saras? What does a person have to say to the kohen? The person can't declare that they actually have a negat saras, because what do they know? The kohen needs to be the one to declare that there's in fact a negat saras. So what's the lashon that's used? Kinega nirli babayis. Something like a nega appeared in the home. And the Svar and Chazal tell us that the parameters of being able to ascertain whether or not this blemish, this stain on the wall, is actually tzaras, needs to be without any visual aid. Needs to be just with the naked eye. If you can see, given the circumstances in that particular room, the Kohen will make the judgment call like that. And the Gemara goes so far to say that if it was a bayis afel, you don't even open the window. You don't pull. Sort of pull aside the curtain. You don't bring more light into the room to see it. And so over there, you see the Gemara associates darkness, a bayis afel, with a nega, and that is also associated with heavy kavel v'kayam. A person who's humbled by life, a person who's in the dark, right? Kipshutai, a person who's in darkness. Hainu, in other words, she'ein meir by shum or elokus. This is not just a reference halachically to a person who finds themselves in a situation where they are in a dark house, they need some kind of siman to let them know where daybreak is. It's much deeper. Reb Tzadok Kedarka tells us it's actually a reference to a person who is in a spiritually dark moment, where there's not illuminating into his life or her life, shum ar elokus v'lo yedazman kabbalas al malchus shemaim emasai. Not simply circumstantially they don't know when dawn is, right, because they're in the dark, but al pi pnimius, what's the value of knowing when dawn is? Because Kriyas Shema. In other words, this person is so in the dark, they don't know how anymore to bring Hashem into their life with Kriyas Shema. That's what it means. That's what we're talking about. Not just a person who's in a dark house, doesn't know when daybreak is, so that he can't say Kriyas Shema. Here we're using the darkness as a metaphor. The person's in an Indian of a nega tsaras, kenega nirali babayis, a person's humbled by life circumstances, and they don't know anymore how to be mekabel al malchus shemayim. So the siman that's given, which halachically is just to tell the person when daybreak is so that they can say Kriyas Shema, understood in this context is much deeper. Because all of a sudden, it emerges that what's the siman for? Not just one to say Kriyas Shema because it's daybreak, but the siman is a way out. How a person can get out of that spiritual darkness to be able to be mekabel o malchus shemayim on themselves. So what is that siman? What's the eitzah? Kivin deshama tinoik yoinik mishtei imai. It's the infant nursing from his mother. The isha misaperes and bala. And the husband and the wife conversing. Now we had learned last week that this is a siman, if you remember this, because last week we learned about stages in a person's spiritual growth process. First we start with maisim, that was the Indian of the chamar ne'ar, right, where the donkey brays, chamar is chumrius, gashmius, do a maisa, right, do a chesed, get involved physically, even on a low level, just on the level of action, just do the right thing. That was step one. Step two was klavim tze'akim, the dogs that are barking. What was that, if you remember? What were the dogs barking? Was the Indian of tefillah on a low level of consciousness. Because the dogs, says the Zohar Kadosh on Rosh Hashanah, are people, right, or are dog-like in a certain sense, who are barking the whole time, have, just give, they just want to take that, and they don't have it as part of a more nuanced circumstance of being able to give back to Hashem, to be able to shine a light in the world. It's all about them. And that was the level of tefillah. The final mishmar was Torah study. Tinok yonik mishtei imai is an aspect of the chalav, the milk, to which Torah is likened, and Isha misaperes and bala was a symbol for Matan Torah, where Klal Yisrael and Hashem are in dialogue, right? We are the Isha, Hashem is the Baal, right? Yom Chasunaso, Zu Matan Torah. That was the exchange when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah. Says Reb Tzadok, okay, here's the advice. Yitztarif atzme bahadi tzibura, connect yourself to a holy group. Be part of a group of mevakshe Hashem. Ubahade rashei ha'eda, and be connected to tzaddikim. Ubahadaihu, and then together, gam hu yachal lekabel ki yadua kasher nichlal nafshe benishmas gedolei hadar heim malin oisai. When that person will humble themselves to a spiritual, or himself to a spiritual guide, then even though right now they're not where they're supposed to be, but in as much as they are mekusher to a tzaddik emes, and that's what they aspire to. We spoke in the Likutei Moharan series, telling over stories. Shivchei tzaddikim means that's our aspiration. That's what we want. Yeah, there are moments when we slip, but that's not. We're not heading downward. We're heading upward, right? And that's the direction that we're trying to reach. So then, in some sense, already their neshama is included in the neshama of the tzaddikim, and they're elevated, like Rabbi Nachman says, a low Jew who's connected to the tzaddik emes is higher than a higher Jew who's not connected to the tzaddik emes, because in some sense, you're carried along with them. You're carried along with them. Just through his kashrus, there's an inyan where they will elevate you, and they will elevate us. But Reb Tzadok adds a very, very important caveat, a very important condition. And he says, V'dafka, this is only kishe'in yachal latzis min habayis aval. This is only if you're really not able to get out of the dark by yourself. Then you can rely on this, that I'm still mekusher to tzaddikim. At the very least, I know that this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. I know that this is not what I'm supposed to be stuck in. I really, b'pnimius, I want to be holy. And the haraya is that I'm connected to tzaddikim, and I learn their Torah, and I'm really trying. That only works if a person is not able to get out themselves. Because Toloi Adav Hai Simanim Chazaka. We have a principle in Chazal called Chazaka. Right? The Torah is mamid, the Torah believes and trusts the inyan of chazaka. Right? There's a cheskes kashrus. If the last known status was kosher, we assume that maintains. But there's a klal in the Gemara that where there's a chazaka, which is called de'ikol livrure mivariron. If you don't have to rely on the chazaka, in other words, it's something you can check out, so then obviously you check it out. You don't rely on the chazaka. Says Reb Tzadok, this siman of Isha Mesaperes and Bala and Tinuk Yonik Mishtei Imai is no better than a chazaka. In other words, if a person could get out of bed, open the door, go outside, obviously that's much better than relying on a siman, obviously. So this is no better than a siman of chazaka, or rather, this siman is no better than chazaka, the heicha de ikalivure mivarinon. When you could clarify the yetzil chutz l'rot. Go out and see. And therefore, the siman, which is a metaphor for a person binding themselves together with a chevraya kadisha, with a holy group of mevakshei Hashem be'emes, a person is connecting themselves to tzaddikim. That only works heicha de leka livrure, when you can't clarify it for yourself, right? Which means that a person genuinely cannot make the next move. Therefore, this is why the Gemara doesn't just give a much, what would appear to be a much better answer as to why you need a siman. Just say a blind person, right? A blind person who can't see. Why do we say a person who's in the dark? Say a blind person. Because the adayin tzarich loymar de gani bebayis sagur she'eni achalatzes lishal mibnei adam. Because we still needed to give this the chiddush that memela suma, a person is actually blind. Okay, what do you want from them? They can't see at all. So then they need a siman. But maybe you think that a person who can see, just they're in a dark room, tough. I mean, that's just where you are. But the Gemara wanted to add this chiddush to say no. Even a person who's in the dark who could see, but they're really locked up. They cannot get out. They can't get out to clarify. They've tried everything. They're stuck in the darkness, despite their desire to break free. They're not able to go out and ask other people. After all of their attempts, it just it doesn't seem that they're able to attain and allow their heart to reach a place of light. So then you have this Eitzah. Az yitztaref b'shmias kol tinok v'isha. Bind yourself together with the voice of the tinok, of that child, that fledgling that's crying out for life-giving energy, the milk of the mother. The Indian of loy rav lalechem loy tzam lamayim kiyim l'shmaya l'dvar Hashem. Bind yourself with people like that, even if you're not holding. That's the Eitzah the Rambam always gives, because the Rambam says the most important factor in a person's growth is who they hang around, who their friends are. You can tell a lot about a person by the caliber of people that they associate with. And that's a choice. In other words, even a person who feels that right now they're not on a certain level, at least our friend group can be in the direction that we're trying to reach. And if we do that, then we'll be lifted up by them. If right now a person isn't where they're supposed to be, but they venerate tzaddikim, and they recognize the glory and the pe'er of people who really made it, even though they can't figure out how, in their own life to break free from their darkness and to get out of the schmutz and the dirt. But they're constantly talking about tzaddikim and telling stories of tzaddik. These are their heroes. This is who we emulate. So that can bring a person out of their darkness. Masha Einkin, however, b'yachol, then it's a different story, right? If a person could get out and they're just trying to sort of take it easy by saying, oh, it's enough that I'm sort of, I'm theoretically part of this shul or this shtibel or this chabura, and theoretically I have a rebbe, that you're just trying to take it easy. That's not the nekuda. If you could do it, you have to do it. The siman only works if they actually can't get out to check it on their own. And that's true halachically, but Reb Tzadok is reading a deeper layer of understanding into the halachic sugya. And he brings Kamashikosa B'Shari Tefillah, it's a Sefer Shara Tefillah, a mashal, a parable to Chabura. Shenech Aleph, a group of people are traveling from point A to point B, and one member of the Chabura becomes ill. What do you think will happen? They want to get to their destination. The person is ill, he can't move. What are they going to do? They're not going to leave him behind. So what will they do? They'll carry him. They will assist him to carry on traveling with them because they're a chabura. They're not going to leave him behind. But oishe meis ayin sham. But imagine if a person dies, then they're likely to just bury him there and carry on. Because what are they going to schlep a dead body with them for? He's not alive anymore, so they bury him. So the nimshal is that the inyan of being mitzaref to a chabura that's heading toward a tzaddik works only if you're alive but you're ill. In other words, the spirituality inside of us is pile. We're really trying our best. We're really active spiritually. And yet, nebuch, we still find ourselves deficient. But a person who checks out, right, which in this context is the mace, it's not going to work. Right? They'll bury us and the chabura will carry on. It won't help that we used to be part of the chabura. So we're not active participants. So the chabura will only help us. Traveling to the tzaddik will only help if we're alive and we have our illness, we have our nega, we have our darkness. But we're really in it. We're be'emes. This is all we want in life. And we deal with our challenges. And we deal with our obstacles and the nephilas and yeridas and everything. But this is how we identify. I remember there's a certain person, he was a bacher in the yeshiva where I was learning a bunch of years ago. And he struggled in certain areas, struggled with getting up for shachris, he struggled with learning, he struggled more than some of the better guys in the yeshiva who were at shachris and learning. And I remember one time I was having a conversation with Rosh Yeshiva was expressing frustration. I was a little bit of a more senior bacher. I was there for over 2 years. And he made a comment. And I knew that this bacher loved tzaddikim. And he was really into the culture, if you will, of Chasidus. And this is how he identified. He grew little payas. And this was his inyan. And I told the Rosh Yeshiva, I said, in my opinion, he's much better off than some of the others who may right now in this moment, they're learning better, they're davening better. But that's not who they are, that's what they're doing now. This person, I told him, might not be doing the things that you want him to do, but he's a yid. Like he's identified with this. And that to me was much more powerful and I was right, sort of years later that this is his trajectory. That's his inyan. And that's a very powerful thing. It's another mashal. I always try to say it, and I can't manage to really capture it perfectly. I said it in the past. I'll say it again. I'm not sure if I can communicate it perfectly, but I think when you're driving down the road, and a car is trying to sort of come out of a side street and turn into the main road, it's not enough to just look at the car. You have to look into the car at the driver, because you don't necessarily know from the way the car is positioned where it's going to turn. You don't know what the driver wants to do. You have to look into the car and see where he's angled, where the body language, very, very important. Otherwise, you just look at the car, you'll have no clue, what the driver's. He might be reversing for all you know. He might be doing a K-turn or U-turn. You always have to look at the driver. And to me, this is what that means. So it's not so much like where the car is positioned. Where's the driver? Where's the driver? What direction is the driver heading in? Another story that I said also in the past, there was a person, a little anti-chassid, a misnagid, who once asked one of the chassidim, what kind of arrogant thing is this? That this group of Jews calls themselves chassidim. And chassidus is like, it's the last rung in the Mesilas Yesharim's ladder. It's like, oh, you're chassidim? Imagine that. It's an incredibly arrogant thing. You call yourselves chassidim. Like, oh, you're chassidim? Give me a break. So many simple Jews, Amarats, and people couldn't hold the Tillim the right side up. So he answered the following thing. He said, is it true that there is a train that's called the Krakow train? I said, yeah, I know that train. It's the Krakow train. He says, why is it called the Krakow train? He said, because it goes all around Europe, and the last stop is Krakow. It's the Krakow train because it's taking people from all over the place to Krakow. So he said, how much time does that train actually spend in Krakow? This is very, very little, because all he does is in Krakow is let off all the passengers. But 90% of the time is nowhere near Krakow. but it's called the Krakow train because it's heading to Krakow. He said this group of people doesn't matter where they are right now or where they spend most of their time. They're called Hasidim because they are heading to Hasidus. This is the Hasidus train. So it doesn't matter where they are, but Pnimius, because Hasidus is all about Ratzon, it's all about that longing and yearning and that directionality and that, not what do you do, it's about who you are be'emes. It's the Hasidus train. It's heading, right? It's heading to Hasidus. That's what that is. Okay? So that's the first piece, which is really crucially important to know. That a person has to try their best, but a person also, as part of trying their best, has to be a part of a growth-oriented group, whether it's virtually online. Hashem made it super easy. There are WhatsApp groups to join. I would say in a more sort of vulgar, like lower level, that's a way to size a person up. Just see what WhatsApp groups they're on. If the person's WhatsApp groups are all sports and betting and gambling and hack and shtiyot, you know what kind of person they are. If a person's on the Lekutimran, Chabura, then the next Chabura is the Kisvei Breslov Chabura, and then the next Chabura is the Lamatas Malachas Chabura, the next one is Mishnah Brura, give out. Then you see what kind of person this is. This is a person who's on the Hasidus train, on the Yiddishkeit train. And therefore, even if right now they're stuck, that's not relevant given the broader picture of where they are headed. That's the Iker. That's the Iker. Okay, that's Chavches. Take a look. Oh, I made a mistake. The next one should be. I don't actually know. Give me 1 second. The next one would be. I'm gonna say Chavtes. I have it in the sefer here. 1 second. Yeah, this next one is Chavtes. Okay. Oh, it says it over here. Okay, and the next one is Lamed. Says the Heilige Reb Tzadok. For this, I just need to read you a little bit of the Gemara, please. So just bear with me here, where the Gemara says that when the Tzaddik went into the Churva where he was davening, he heard a Bas Kol. Shamati Bas Kol. This is from the Gemara. The Gemara says he heard a Bas Kol crying out like a dove, V'oimeres, and it was saying, Oy levanim sheba avanesei mechravti as beisi v'sarafti as eichali ve'egleisim lebeinu umais. Woe are to my children that on account of their actions, on account of the way that relationship fell apart, I've destroyed my home, I've burnt the Heichal, and I've exiled my sons among the nations of the world. Okay, that's what he heard in the Churva, which he went into daven by, and we're going to learn about that in the next teaching as well. Says the Heilige Reb Tzadok, follow the order. Churban Habayis, Sreifas HaHeichal, and the Galus of Yisrael Beinu Umas Ha'olam. So Reb Tzadok all the time is an individualist, and so he's going to read these broad, sweeping descriptions of the exile of the whole nation, and he's going to learn it in terms of what it means for me and for you and for us as individuals. So Mitchila Churban Habayis HaPnimi. The Gemara is telling us that this is the order in which our spiritual lives collapse. The first thing is Churban Habayis HaPnimi. This is called Beis Dira. Uboy Dai Rak Churva Shecharev Me'ein Darim. The inner Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. As we're going to see what that means, just bear with it. Following that is the burning of the external Heichal, the Churbanei Hainu Sreifa, right? And so the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is just emptying it out so that it's no longer a bias, right? And there was no longer Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, and everybody was gone. That's called Churban Habayis. Sreifas HaHeichal is the actual destruction. V'achar kach Galus Yisrael. That's the order that the Bas Kol expressed pain over these three stages. And the same is true for a person who's stuck in sin. The first thing that happens, that's called churban bayis hapnimi, is that the heart loses touch with the awareness of Hashem. And the heart loses Yerushalayim. And the heart stops caring, stops being aware, stops feeling. Okay, that's called churban bayis. Sreifas ha'heichal ve'achar kach is b'moyach shesham eina medar kavua, where the moyach, that's not a place where the person is situated. The moyach is full of thoughts that come and go, but the person is really in their leiv. That's where the person operates out of. Ki bayis zu isha shi ha'leiv. The bayis is a reference to the isha, right? Ishtoi zu beisai, as Chazal tell us, and that's a reference to the leiv, as the women are connected to the concept of the heart, right? Bina Yisera, Bina is the leiv. Vu nisraf legamri. As a result of a loss of Yerushalayim in the mind, so then Sreifas ha'heichal, the bias is destroyed. She'einenu makom machil af leprakim machsheva shem shemayim shu'ula yaver hir tshuva leleiv, and therefore the heart just stops feeling. The mind stops being aware, the heart starts feeling. And then the whole body is exiled into actions that are far away from Kedusha. So what about tshuva? Tshuva, says Reb Tzadok, lehepech. Tshuva has to be in the opposite order. Like it's written in the Zohar, Yerushalayim, first Yerushalayim will be built up, and then Klal Yisrael will be ingathered from the exile. Ubi Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi says in Meiser Sheni, which is a Masechta in Yerushalmi, the binyan abayis al yedei malchei umas ha'olam. Fascinatingly enough, there's a teaching that the binyan Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi will be built by umas ha'olam, not by Klal Yisrael. They will come and they will build the Bayis Hashlishi. Fascinating thing. So what does this all mean? Dimitchila tikkun amidas. First, the person has to go ahead and work on their heart, v'halev. And then a person goes ahead and rectifies their actions. First, a person has to try to feel. In getting out of tumah. But how do we feel? How does a person come to really feel those feelings of ava and yira in their heart? V'nireh, so it's all out of order. Heichal that although heichal comes before, heichal koydem bebinyan labayis, v'chemitchila hamoyach, first the mind needs to come first. K'moshekasav harambam reish parak beis mi yisoidei haTorah, where the Rambam writes, what's the way in which a person can come to love and to be in awe of Hashem, is to contemplate Hashem's presence, is to feel the reality of the way that all of nature and all of existence is unfolding each and every minute, yesh me'ayin from Hashem, echadash b'tuva b'chaim tamid ma'aseh berachos, to find the wisdom in creation, to meditate on that. And that can activate the midas in one's heart. So in this context, the bias, and then the heichal, and then the Evrei HaMaisa. And that is the order in which a person can recover from this experience of this inner breakdown, right, of where they are. And so it emerges that the main thing ultimately is the action, because we want to be ingathered from our gullus. But really the main thing is the heart, right? Because you're not going to change, a person's not going to change their behavior unless they change the way that they feel around those experiences. We spoke about that Thursday night. But really the main thing is the mind, because the only way that a person will come to a place where their feelings are proper is if in their mind they're elevated to the proper state of awareness. And so how we think influences how we feel, which influences how we act. And so we have to work on our moyach. That's really where it's all rooted. Ultimately is how we think. And this also speaks to the previous point, right? You can have people who are acting appropriately, but whose mind is not really where it's supposed to be. And you can have other people whose mind is plugged in, but for whatever reason there's a disconnect. But ultimately, because in essence they're rooted in a proper way, in a clear way of engaging with reality, eventually it will have its impact. It might take time, but it's much more essential, right? It's deeply rooted in the essence of who they are. Okay, and that's Tzidkas HaTzaddik Chaf Tes. Take a look at Lamed, and here Reb Tzadok in Lamed is speaking about this Gemara that I just mentioned. So I'm just going to read it to you inside. It's on Daf Gimel Lamed Aleph in the beginning of Berachos. And the Gemara says, Amar Reb Yosi. Okay, you don't have this in front of me. I'm just reading it inside. Pam achas yisem ahalech b'derech. One time I was walking along the road, v'nechnasti lechurba achas michorbanos Yerushalayim kedei lehispal. And I went into one of the destroyed structures of Yerushalayim in order to daven. But Eliyahu HaNavi came, v'shamar li ala Pesach, v'himtin li ad shesiyamti tfilasi. He waited at the opening of the churva until I finished davening. Le'achar shesiyamti tfilasi, after I finished, Eliyahu HaNavi said, "Va'amar li b'ni mipnei ma nechnasta l'churba zu." Why did you enter into this structure? Amarti lai, I went in lihispala. Va'amar li, and he said to me, "Hayya l'cha lihispala b'derech." You should have davened on the road, not to go in there. I was worried that I would be interrupted by Oivei Drachim. People are passing; they're gonna disturb me. You should have davened the short tefillah so as not to be disturbed, right? And the Gemara learns three things from there, right? Not to. The main point is not to go into a churba, right? Because there are mazikim there, and it could be damaging. And so he just brings over here in the commentary, Hari shehimtin loy ala Pesach. But what emerges from here is that Eliyahu HaNavi waited for him to complete his tefillah. Right? Tefillah Kutsara. Okay, and that's what we see, that he waited until he finished. He didn't interrupt him in the middle. So Reb Tzadok is going to learn something important from here as a general principle. Says Reb Tzadok, Af ma'aseh she'eina haguna be'etzem, even something that you know that someone else is doing that isn't proper. You know it's not right. Kol shehi haguna kefi machshavas ha'adam, as long as in that person's mind they are doing the right thing, vihi ma'aseh mitzvah, and it really is a good thing. Rak shahayil l'asoseh outside hayoser tov. They could have done it in a better way. Don't hold somebody back from doing what in their heart and mind they think is right. They don't know any better, but don't interrupt them. Because what do you know? In that moment, it's like that story from the Baal Shem Tov, and that was a very radical story. That story of the little boy in Yom Kippur who runs in, doesn't know how to daven, the famous thing, and different opinions as to what exactly happened there. Some more radical than others. Either he whistled, or he played his flute, or he just started screaming out. And the people stopped him. And the Baal Shem Tov said, I wish you wouldn't have. I wish you would have let him. Because I've been working on breaking through the barriers. And with all of our tefillos that were all perfect, and out of the machzor saying all the right words with all the right kavanas, nothing was working. And came this pure-hearted shepherd boy who didn't know how to daven, but he did what he knew how. And either he just started screaming on the top of his lungs, which is the less radical reading, or he whistled, which is a little bit more radical, or he mamish was mechalel Yom Kippur and played a flute, because it came from such a place of Rachmana li babai, that broke through. So you wait until he finishes. Then you call him over afterwards and you say, oh, by the way. But in the middle of the act, It's impossible for us to know Klape Shmaya what that is. Where do we learn that from? Kidemashma me Eliyahu. This is exactly what we see with Eliyahu HaNavi. Shehimtin ad shesiyim tfilasai v'lo manei tekef. Because Eliyahu HaNavi should have really, theoretically, have marched on into the churba, yanked him by his ear, pulled him outside, and told him, "Meturnished." We don't do things like this. But Eliyahu HaNavi waited for him to finish. Because even though that's not something that one should do, all the while that this he just didn't know. And he's doing the best that he knows how. So then leave him, because it's impossible for us to know where that reaches in Shemayim, even though in Shulchan Aruch it would appear like this is not a relevant act. But from the consciousness of understanding that, there's what's written in Shulchan Aruch, and then there's also Kasvi Maluach Libecha. There's also the Shulchan Aruch, so to speak, of the heart. Echad HaMarbe v'Echad HaMamit, whether a person does a lot, person does a little, as we're going to learn in the next piece, Ubelvad Shechavin Liba La Shemayim, Eliyahu HaNavi had enough consciousness to wait and to allow that person to finish up making whatever tikkun that tefillah was making, even though it wasn't outside HaYoser Tov. Then Reb Tzadok says, maybe if you're going to say, no, you can't bring a raya from here, because where was he supposed to daven? Maybe there's no other place to daven. So Eliyahu HaNavi said, okay, listen, he's in Einis, right? And it's a b'di'evet, but there's really no other place. The Gemara says, Eliyahu HaNavi told him, you should have davened on the road. So if you're going to say that, no, that we know that there was another place for him to be able to daven, because Eliyahu HaNavi told him, you should have davened on the road. No, maybe it was possible before he went in, but now that he's in, somehow he wasn't able to daven on the road anymore. Says Reb Tzadok, no, ve'ena b'mashma. Yeah, it's possible to suggest that was the case, but that's not mashma from the Gemara. Even we see if he was able to go out to daven, still Eliyahu HaNavi didn't hold him back. He did not interrupt his tefillah that he was already in the middle of offering up. And then again, Reb Tzadok is sort of grappling with this idea, because he wants to say it, but it's a radical thing. So he's playing in his mind. And by the way, he leaves it in suffix. He doesn't answer this one up. He says maybe, right? He says, maybe this was an exception to all other cases because it would have interrupted his tefillah. So this is a different thing. But you can't bring a raya from here to all other similar cases. It was specifically here because he was already prepared to daven, and he was already in the middle of getting ready to daven. So maybe you could say that there's not a raya from here because tefillah is an exception to the rule, but generally speaking, other things you would intervene. Period. And Reb Tzadok finishes. But he included it in his sefer, right? This is so usually in the way that Gemara, sort of Talmudic thinking works. If you reach a maskana at the end of a reasoning where you throw it out, you don't necessarily include it. If you include it in the sefer and you print it, it means, like they say, to a havamina, in as much as it was a havamina, there's some relevance. And because it's sort of a dangerous idea, like what are the parameters of this, Reb Tzadok calls it into question, but he prints it. And he prints it with a definitive statement in the beginning. This is what it is. It's possible to suggest that this was an exception, but it's also possible that this is the general rule. Interestingly enough, they bring here in this Pirish on Tzidkas HaTzaddik from the Ben Ish Chai and Ben Yo Ben Yoyada. And the Ben Ish Chai brings something very, very similar. I'll just read you the last few lines. V'hu himten li, right? This Indian of what the Gemara says, Reb Yosi says, Eliyahu HaNavi waited for me. L'lamdeinu to teach ba Eliyahu zachar latoiv koidim shehischel espalo. Eliyahu came even before he was in the middle of davening, before he started davening, which was Reb Tzadok's exception, because there you'd say no, because he would already started davening, so you don't interrupt him. You can't learn from there to everywhere else. Says the Bnei Yada, no. V'himtin li, koidim shehischel ispalel, v'im kain, v'im kol zel loy bitloi. But he still didn't interrupt him, v'hi nichol ispal sham. So it's almost as if the Ben Ish Chai is coming to sort of fortify and to ratify the teaching of Reb Tzadok, which Reb Tzadok leaves as a suffix. The Ben Ish Chai says no, he hadn't started davening, he wouldn't have been interrupting him at all. This general principle remains true. If a Jew is doing the best they can and they have holy intentions and what they're doing is a mitzvah, it's not perfect al tzad hadin, let them. Afterwards you can go over to them. But don't interrupt somebody who's in the middle of a holy act, because you don't know whether that might be the thing that's changing the whole world. Very, very powerful. Okay, let's learn just one last piece, because there's not enough time for Ois Mem. Ois Mem is very, very deep, and I want to leave a little bit more time. So let's just do one more piece for tonight. And this is Ois Lamed Aleph. And it's a comment on the same Gemara that we've been learning about, where Reb Yosi goes in there, and what did Eliyahu HaNavi tell him? You should have davened a short tefillah. Why a short tefillah? Because he was worried that if he davens a long tefillah, he's going to get interrupted because of the Ovrei Drachim, right? And that's why he couldn't daven on the path, because he wanted to daven a long tefillah. So he went into the churba, and Eliyahu HaNavi said, okay, cool. You should have stayed on the path. But there are going to be people who are walking back and forth. Daven a tefillah k'tzara. Says Reb Tzadok HaKayin, Ein lehispalo b'makim she'efshar lehisbal be'emtza. A person should not daven in a physical location where they are going to be disturbed in the middle. Ela tefillah k'tzar. Just make it short, but make it focused. Shelo yizbal b'ba, and in that way a person won't be mivulbal. Because we have a principle, ki toiv ma'at b'kavana, neharbis b'loy kavana. This is a teaching that's not usually, sort of implemented or really taken very seriously at all. We have a system, and a structure where it's just do as much as you can. There's not so much of a focus on kavana, but this is really a teaching in Chazal. Better a little bit, but it's for real, than a ton, but it's mindless. That's Chazal, right? Toiv ma'at bekavana, meharbas b'loy kavana. So in a case like this, where it's usher to go into a churba because of mazikim, and there could be damaging forces there, and a person shouldn't go there. So he should have davened outside, but he's right. If he davens a long tefillah, he's going to be all over the place, he's going to be confused, he's going to be distracted. Okay, so a little bit, which is a tefillah k'tzara, with kavana, is better than a longer tefillah with a lot. And that's what Eliyahu HaNavi was telling him. You should daven a tefillah k'tzara. So now Reb Tzadok makes it much more personal. V'chein b'chol inyan v'zman. And this isn't just true for a person literally standing outside on Hendon Way, standing, has to daven for whatever reason. Daven a tefillah k'tzara, otherwise get distracted. No, this means internally as well. B'chol inyan v'zman k'she'ein yachal lechaven kol hatefillah. Where for whatever reason a person's tired, or tarud, right, and not going to be able to daven the whole tefillah with kavanah from beginning to the end. Well, every drachim doesn't mean people are passing in front of you back and forth on the road. It means inside, derech hamelech shel olam, chalo smali shebalev. In a person's heart, there are all these forces and voices and distracting elements, yafsiku me'avodah, which are going to get in the way. Yispal tefillah k'tzara al kopanim b'kavanah. Says Reb Tzadok, daven less, but daven with kavanah. And it's hard to know whether he means less quantitatively, because at that point, which part of davening should you cut out? Like you need every part of davening. What do you mean daven tefillah k'tzara?
Isn't that the Amit Rabbeinu, I think it's called, which is the abridged?
Yes, right. But that's for very specific halachic cases, and not necessarily for a person who feels a little bit tired this morning, so they're going to say Havinenu, right? The halachic responsibility of saying Shemana Esrei applies across the board. So I think the way that we'd have to learn this is something similar to the way Rabbi Nachman deals with the same inyan in Sichos Ran, where the tzaddik says Pick one part of davening. Don't try to force yourself to have kavanah in every part of davening. Pick one segment of davening, and that put your whole guts into it. Put your whole kishkas into that part of davening. A Baruch Sha'amar, you're going to do a Baruch Sha'amar like nobody's ever heard. I Mizmor L'Saida, Yehi Chavoid, Ashrei, the Hallelujahs, you don't have the head for it. Okay, that you'll just carry on saying Keseder and you'll do the best you can. But Tefillah K'tzara means pick one part of davening and really put your whole heart into it. That every person could do. That's what Rabbi Nachman says. To daven the whole thing mitchila v'ad saif, really, really difficult to do. Halavai. If a person can, they should. But toiv ma'at bekavana meharbas harbas harbas shalei bekavana. And that comes out from what Eliyahu HaNavi was telling him. You shouldn't have gone into the churva. You should have stood on the road. There will be distractions. Daven et tefillah k'tzar. Toiv ma'at bekavana meharbas shalei bekavana. So quickly to review the pieces that we learned. Number one, a person is in a darkened room. What's the siman? The siman is tinik yanik mishtei imai and isha mesaper sembala. Bind yourself with a good chevra, mevakshe Hashem, honest people, humble people, growing people. That's A. And connect with that chabura toward a tzaddik. And then, if it's really true that you can't get out, and you're really trying your best, but you're still in the darkness, you're covered. You're part of a holy chabura. In the end, it will be okay. That's A. The second teaching was the order of tikkun needs to be moyach, and then leiv, and then maisa, right? Where a person has to build up the bias, and then rectify the heichal, right? And then ultimately a person will rectify their maisim. The third teaching was a teaching about not interrupting people when we see that they're not doing things perfect, but in their heart and mind they really mean well, and they mean to be doing the right thing. So it's not kedai to interrupt their service. And we learned that from Eliyahu HaNavi, who waited for Reb Yosi to finish davening his b'diavad tefillah in a churva, which he should never have done, and didn't interrupt him in the middle. And finally, the teaching that we just learned, another thing from Eliyahu HaNavi, who tells him you should have davened on the road, and if you're worried about distraction, daven a tefillah kitsara, because toiv ma'at bekavana meharbos shalei bekavana. All from half an amud of Gemara, where a person can learn this Gemara their whole life and not be able to mine it for the spiritual riches and the principles that emerge if we develop an ability to listen, to be makshiv, not just to read the words and translate them and understand them. What are the inyanim? What are the messages? What are the practical concepts that emerge between the lines that we can take and apply much more broadly to our Avodah Hashem? Ashrina. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you to everybody who joined us on the Zoom. Thank you very, very much. It means a lot to me and to all of us that you're with us. And wishing everybody a most amazing week. שכל כך אוהב אותי, האב שלי, מלך חי וקיים, על כל נשימה שאני